Hello, hello, and welcome to Journey to SCA 2024. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we'll be talking a few things about narratives, a few things about reports, and a little bit about poetry comprehension. So, continue, take a seat, sit back, and let's get into it. All right, so we're here again. It's Tuesday. We're heading into SCA 2024, and so we're in our revision mode, trying to fill in gaps, refine concepts, and really get into the skills that students need for the exam. So all along this time, as we're going through, we're really talking exam strategies and exam skills. So yes, there are, the narrative writing skills and the report writing skills and comprehension skills in general. But remember, because this is an exam, students have to really approach things a little bit differently than they would in a classroom. And so, what I would be sharing with you, I'm really trying to help you give your child or your students that little extra exam preparation edge that's going to really help them do their best during the exam. Because it's not just writing a report, it's not just writing a narrative, and it's not just responding to a comprehension either. They're doing it according to time, they're doing it according to certain requirements. And so we really want them to get into the exam strategies. So for those of you who are new to the live, my name is Shelly Ann Edwards Byron, and I'm a creative writing specialist. I work with something called multisensory learning because I believe that we really do need to engage all our senses through learning, and that's the best way to get students to feel I guess I want to say less stressed about writing, because we all know there are a number of students who just they hate writing. So we want to move them from hating it to actually appreciating it. They don't have to love it, but if we get them there, that's a plus. But we really want to make them feel engaged and that it's more than just something tedious, because writing and reading, these are strategies and skills that they're going to need throughout their lives. So yes, we're preparing for an exam, but at the same time we want to make the time count. So today, let's see, we're talking today about reviewing formal tone and transitions in reports. We're also going to be looking at setting descriptions in narratives. And for the comprehension, we're looking at poetry comprehension and a few strategies where that is concerned. So we're looking at like questions and answers. And if you haven't already downloaded the schedule that I'm working with, go to the what is it, SCA Peacefield Approach Facebook group. And in that group, you would get the study schedules available. So there's one for narratives, there's one for reports, and there's one for comprehension. And so what I'm going to be going through with you now would be what sort of activities and strategies you would use during the study time. So with the reports, for example, and in fact with all of them, the aim is to spend 3 separate sessions working on these things during the week. So we want 2 sessions, approximately 30 minutes, and then one full session where you want to allocate like an hour so that students can write a complete activity. And that's for the reports and the narratives. For the comprehension, you want to allocate like an hour and a half per se, and that would give the student time to complete an entire English language arts paper with all the comprehension requirements to it. So, all right. So, good morning. Is that Choi Felix? I'm seeing. Hi, morning. Thank you for joining. And of course, you can put comments if you have any questions about anything. Now, today we're dealing with transitions, formal tone for reports, and the descriptions for narratives, as I said. But if you have questions about anything else, report related or narrative related, feel free to ask them once we have the time today, because I'm aiming for about an hour. Once we have the time today, I'll answer it. If I don't get it today, I will get it during the next session just to make sure that your questions are answered. All right. So, okay, so let's get started with the formal tone and transitions. Now, this is a revision, and of course, everything that we're doing this term should be revision. So at this point, you should be aware of how your child or your students, how they're faring when it comes to the transitions and this whole thing about formal tone. Now, if you are not too sure and you want to go back and double check, let me know. I've done episodes on this before. So for the transitions, let's see, transitions, I know that would be episodes 14 and episode 15, right? Um okay, no, that didn't come up. I want to put it up on the screen for those of you who need to see it as well as hearing me saying it so that you would know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so episode 14 and 15, what I did when I covered, that's when I covered, so episode 14, report transitions, that's the intro to that. Episode 15, using transitions and describing setting. And then episode, when we're dealing with describing setting, and that's for the narrative setting. We're looking at episode 16 as well. That's going to give you a lot of background and a lot of detail where the description is concerned. When it comes to formal tone, I know I did an entire section on an episode on formal tone. Vocabulary was part of it. That's episode 8. When I find it, I'll put it up so that you could find it easily, because the thing is, now you want to be implementing all of those things that we discussed earlier, right? So just to give a general idea of the formal tone and transitions and how they're connected. Now, formal tone has to do with the attitude of the writing. So, when we talk about formal tone in a report, we're talking about the writer's attitude toward the person who is reading and the writer's attitude toward the information that they're sharing. And because we want it formal, we know that we have to use certain types of vocabulary. We want to use certain sentence structures. We want to share the information in a very organized and structured way. So when someone reads the report, they get a sense of this very respectful, very organized and structured and deliberate and precise kind of writing. That's the overall feel that you're going for. And there are several things that would lead toward that. Now, the number one thing that I advocate, and I spoke about it last week, so if you didn't get last week episodes, you can go back and check that one. In the introduction, I advocate like a 3 sentence format for the introduction. It's very direct and clear. And with that 3 sentence format, you begin immediately establishing the formal tone for the report. And so there's a way to share the information. It's not enough to just have all the details. You will get the marks for having the details, and the student would probably score anywhere between 12 to 15 if they're doing things the way they should be done. But if you really want to score the 18 to 20 that everybody's aiming for, then you have to be exemplary, because if you know the categories: proficient, is when students are doing the things that they're supposed to do. Exemplary is when they're adding that little bit extra. And when I say extra, their writing is a little bit more refined and it demonstrates a deeper understanding of just the basics of the report writing. And so to do that, we really want to get this formal tone clear and strongly evident throughout the report. One of the best ways to do that is to use effective transitions. And the transitions must be there, but what makes them more effective in a report to get that formal tone really strongly established is when they flow neatly with the information. And when I say flow, yes, you can think about water flowing and think about it flowing smoothly and naturally around and over everything. That is what you want, that natural kind of flow with the report writing. So with transitions, we have two things. We have transition words and we have transition phrases. Both are appropriate and both are expected to be used in a report. But here's a tip, and I mentioned this before. This is a repetition because remember, we're dealing with reinforcing concepts and practicing them in these weeks to come. So this week with transitions, what you're looking at is making sure that your child or students really understand how to use transition phrases. And so here's a tip that I tell my students, and then we practice and I show them how to do it. I don't have enough time to get into all of that today, but here is a tip nonetheless. Um, Use transition phrases at the beginning of paragraphs, not transition words. So I've said it before and I'll keep saying this. Transition words are good and they should be used. I'm not saying don't use transition words. What I am suggesting is that a transition word at the beginning of a paragraph is going to feel more abrupt than a transition phrase. Transition phrases help you go more smoothly into the next idea. And for those of you who are not sure what a transition is, again, episodes 14 and 15 go into a whole lot of detail with that. But I'll tell you this, transitions are simply words and phrases that guide readers smoothly from one idea to the next. So we don't want it to feel as if, we're throwing darts at you with information. We want it to feel like if things are integrated and connected because we value your time and we want you to receive the information effectively. And that's really what a transition does, helps the reader to understand the information effectively. Now, there are lots of different types of transition words and phrases. Not all of them are appropriate for reports. And so we need to be careful. The ones we pay attention to are the ones that deal with sequence, time, and location. So those three, because those are the details that you want in a report: sequence, time, and location. And so any transition word or phrase that relates to sequence, time, and location, then that's going to work well. So I'll put that up. So the transitions, we want sequence, time, and location. And those are the ones that really work well for the report writing. So we can do things like addition as well, like also and so on. But um, usually transition conjunctions like and so on would work better depending on how the report is structured, but the main ones are sequence, time, and location. And so we want to work with transition phrases, as I said. Um, two transition words that students use quite a lot because they're simple to use and they're easily understood are next and then. Those are very, very good transitions to use within sentences, and they help you understand, what's coming next and, what was done after, by saying then such and such took place and so on. They're not the best for the beginning of a sentence. When you put words like that at the beginning of a sentence, so we have then, next, firstly, those are transition words that when they are at the beginning of a sentence or the beginning of a paragraph, they feel very abrupt. So if you're reading a paragraph and you say firstly, because and then after a transition you have a comma, right? Whether it's a transition phrase or a word, there's a comma that comes after it. So if you say firstly and then you give the information, it's a whole different feeling from if you say at the beginning of the workshop or prior to the commencement of the activity. Those phrases give you more of a flow and more of a gradual movement from one idea to the next. And it kind of eases readers into the content. And that is what you want when you're aiming for a formal tone. So next and then and firstly and all the other transition words, use them, but use them within a sentence. At the beginning of sentences or at the beginning of a paragraph, you really, really want to have a transition phrase, and that would guide you most efficiently into the next idea. And that, in and of itself, creates what we call a complex sentence because transition phrases, especially those that have sequence, time, and location, they tend to be subordinate clauses, and those need a coordinating clause or what we call an independent clause. And so you automatically create a complex sentence when you use a transition phrase. And because of that, you're elevating your writing right away. So you're getting two things done if you use a transition phrase. You're getting a complex sentence that elevates the writing, and you're including transitions, which are a requirement of report writing. So if you can get more than one thing done in one with one action, even better. And that's why I'm recommending using that transition phrase at the beginning of a sentence or at the beginning of a paragraph and not using that transition word. But of course, please do include transition words because in the rubric, we're saying transition phrases and words are mentioned, which means if you want to get that 18 to 20, you need to show an understanding and an ability to use both. So that's what we want to work with when we're talking about the transitions and how it's connected to the formal tone. Now, there is a possibility to overdo transitions. So, a word of caution, every sentence does not have to begin with a transition word or phrase. Every paragraph does not have to begin with a transition phrase. My recommendation is to the way it would work, the format that is used for the introduction, if you're starting with on and the date, that is a transition phrase there. Your paragraph 2, transition phrase beginning. Paragraph 3, no transition phrase. Paragraph 4, may or may not. And paragraph 5, because of course we're working with that 5 paragraph structure, then I would recommend that transition. So alternate or have at least 2 out of the 5 paragraphs that do not begin with a transition phrase or a transition word or that kind of thing because we don't want it to be overly complex and every sentence being complex and complicated. One of the other things that is required is a variety of sentence structures. And what happens when you have a variety of sentence structures is that you are now sort of managing the flow of the information. And that shows a higher level of writing and understanding with how to put words together in the English language to share ideas. And so if you practice that, not putting it for all of them, but deciding where you want to put it, then you can create your own sort of template and work with that. And when it comes to report writing, it's a lot easier to create a template for a report than it is to create for a narrative, simply because of how structured a report is. In fact, for students who write a lot, you want to work with 3 to 5 sentences. For students who are struggling with writing and coming up with ideas and that type of thing, my recommendation is 3 sentences per paragraph. And you can sit with the student, work out, you know what is supposed to go into each paragraph. And so you can work out, put this kind of information, sentence one, put this kind of information, sentence two, end your paragraph with this kind of detail, depending on the different kind of report that you're working on. So incidents and accidents tend to have a similar kind of flow. The events and competitions tend to have a similar kind of flow. Activities tend to have a similar flow with some competitions. So you can group and then, create that kind of structure. So I have a question. Can a transitional phrase be used inside the paragraph and not just at the beginning? Absolutely, yes. And I do recommend the transitional phrase being used at the beginning of a sentence. It can be in the middle, at the end, depending on how the sentence is structured. But when you're working with students who need to have um like clear instructions, do this, and so they can repeat and consistently respond, then you want to give directives and tell students do this kind of thing. So you're not telling them what words to put, but you're giving them a skill and a strategy. Put this kind of information here, and that would help them, when they see the prompt and they analyze it and all those things, they would be able to remember, hey, okay, do this in this order, and they have a structure to follow. Many students require that kind of structure for an exam setting. Some students, the ideas flow and all they need is the overall structure. That is wonderful. Then you just tell them, okay, transition words and phrases, and they're fine. But when you have a struggling writer or someone who is, they have challenges with formatting certain things and coming up with ideas and so on, you want to give them a more detailed kind of template to follow, and that works really well. And so yes, in within the paragraph, but I would recommend no more than two. So if you're working with 3 sentences, then you have 2 sentences with the transition word or phrase, and one sentence that just is a straight, simple sentence with direct information. Again, we're doing that because we want a variety of sentence structures and we don't want the paragraph to feel overly tedious to read. Because, at the end of the day, complex sentences are wonderful. The long sentences are wonderful. But if all the sentences are like that, it's going to be a real mouthful for readers. And what you want is dissemination of information in a clear and precise way at the end of the day. And this is a report at primary school level. So we're not talking about a PhD dissertation where, you can have like one sentence is like 3, 4 lines, and even in that case, I think that's overdoing it because the people who are reading it are still human beings and they still have to figure out what you're trying to say. So if it's overly complex and it's overly cumbersome, then it's going to create a challenge for the reader. And anytime you have your reader at the point where they have to go back and reread a paragraph or a sentence 2 and 3 times to understand it properly, you're running into challenges and you're running into problems with your clarity and your precision in your writing. And so that is something you really want to avoid. Another question. How many paragraphs do you have to write? Um, I'm going to give you my recommendation and then I'll explain to you why I'm saying strongly and leaning strongly on that word recommendation. Um, because the Ministry of Education does not stipulate They don't say write this amount or write that amount. If you study the creative writing prompts, whether narratives or reports, you'll see that the prompts are fairly open-ended so that students are able to fill in and express themselves effectively. So it is not something that they have to do this. I recommend 5 paragraphs for specific reasons. And for students who, like I said, are struggling to write, then you can work with five. Well, I call it 3 by 5. For those who are more robust with their writing, you want to work with a 5 by 5. What do I mean by that? 3 by 5, 3 sentences, 5 paragraphs. Or if you want to go 5 by 3, 5 paragraphs, 3 sentences each, whichever way you want to look at it. And for stronger students, then you can go 5 by 5, 5 paragraphs, 5 sentences each. There are some students who go 6 paragraphs. I even had a student once who did 7 paragraphs. My thinking is a report is meant to be concise. And while you can write more, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should write more, so that what you're aiming for is to demonstrate your ability to rein in all these details and give the precise information. Because one of the number one things with reports is, if you look at the rubric, it says details are carefully selected. And you see that idea of carefully selecting details? That means you decide what to keep and what to discard, what readers need to know to fulfill the prompt, and what they don't absolutely have to know. So keeping it concise is way better than rambling to 7 paragraphs. Now, this is my opinion, and I'm going to stress that because there are some students who can handle it. The average student that I work with are students who are they're proficient or they're struggling, and so they really need guidance and structure and precise strategies to help them master the report writing for the exam. And as a result of that, that's why I am very much into this structure of the 5 paragraphs, because here's what that does: it gives you an order and a natural flow. Introduction, paragraph 1, summary: who, what, where, when. Paragraph 2, what, where did things begin? What happened before the incident or activity or event? The paragraph 3, main focus of the incident, activity, etc. Paragraph 4, immediate responses to what happened in paragraph 3. And then your paragraph 5 is going to be the conclusion and wrapping up, in which case consequences, results, vote of thanks, thank yous. We want lingering consequences, punishments, those kinds of things. That's paragraph 5. So when you take it like that, in this 5 paragraph structure, what you're getting is a clear organization of ideas. And so you don't have to worry about what do I put here or what do I say next. Because paragraph 1, summary, and we have a 3 sentence format structure for that. Paragraph 2, I know I'm talking about how things came to be. And so if it's an incident, where was I when I witnessed it? What were the other people doing before the thing happened? And so on. Competition rules and regulations, activities, guidelines, event, introductions, preliminary stuff. And so if you want to find out more about what goes into each paragraph for each type of report, then you can go back last year, last term, check through the archives of this series, Journey to SEA 2024, and you'll find I did for each type of report. So I'll tell you exactly right now where it begins. Um, we did analyzing prompts, and then we did accidents. So we started with incidents. Incidents is episode 27. And so episode 27 goes through What do you put in an incident report, paragraph by paragraph? Episode 28 deals with accidents. What do you put in an accident report, paragraph by paragraph? So if you need that kind of information, you want to go from episode 27 to episode 32, right? Episode 27 to 32 covers each type of report, right? And so you will get that paragraph by paragraph. So when you're going through this week and you're revising transitions and all those things, if you're still not sure about how to do some of these things, you go to those episodes. And if you're not sure about what goes into each type of report, and the different types that I recommend that you study, then you can go episodes 27 to 32, and that would give you some more details on that. So remember again, this week is revision. So we had 3 sessions, two 30-minute sessions on average, one 1 hour session where you're writing a complete report. So in the first session, you want to make sure the student understands some examples. So you're providing examples of transition words and phrases that can be used appropriately at each paragraph. And then the second one, you want to practice writing a few. That's the second 30-minute session. And then finally, when you give the complete report to write, they're integrating and incorporating everything to get that formal tone and use the transitions effectively. So that's your agenda for this week when you're studying reports, right? So let's now shift over to narratives and see what the agenda is for reviewing and studying narratives this week to really maximize on the time moving forward. So we're looking at with narratives, what are we looking at? We're looking at setting descriptions. And so for setting descriptions, if you don't have a lot of background in describing settings, you want to go to, like I said, episode 15 and 16, and that would give you a lot more background of the same series I'm talking about with the setting description. And so let's see, what are the main things to consider with setting description? The number one thing is that you're working with 3 levels of descriptions, right? I guess, okay, levels is probably not the best word, but let's say types. You're working with 3 types of descriptions. That's the number one thing to remember, because you're looking at vivid verbs. We want figurative language, and we want sensory language, right? So when you're talking descriptions, and primarily setting descriptions is where you will see these things. Um, when we're talking setting descriptions, we're not just talking randomly, okay, we want to see descriptions. What exactly are the examiners looking for? If you study the rubric, this is what you will see. Figurative language and sensory language. I am adding the vivid verbs because that is part of the whole equation, and I think it's important. Um, Now, I don't like to use the word boring because I feel like there's a time and place for everything. And so I try not to say, okay, that's boring, or don't use boring verbs or boring words. These words are useful depending on what your aim is. And so I don't like the concept of boring words. What I'd like to say is that, do you have enough vivid description to really get readers involved? If you don't, then you need some more vivid words, you need figurative language, you need sensory language. So here's the difference between the two. Figurative language, well, 3. Figurative language has to do with similes, metaphors, personification, alliteration, hyperbole. Those are the 5 that I recommend. There are others. You can use idioms and so on, but those are the 5 or 6 that I recommend. Similes, metaphors, alliteration, personification, hyperbole, and onomatopoeia. Those are the six, right? And so you want to have some demonstration of using those within the story. And you don't want to have like, five similes and nothing else. You want to have like maybe two similes, two personification, one onomatopoeia. You want to have a variety. You don't have to have all of them, but I would say at least three. And they need to be used effectively. So you can practice that, practice using personification and so on. You can practice that. So that's with the figurative language. Sensory language has a lot to do with imagery, which would be looking at your five senses and your emotions. It also includes movement, but the vivid verbs, that's where you really tackle movement, where instead of saying ran, you could say bolted. Instead of saying walked, you could say dragged feet. So you have more vivid expressions to say what the character is doing, and that's why they're called vivid verbs. And so that deals with movement. But sensory language otherwise covers, words and expressions that appeal to the sense of sight, colors, shapes, age, distance, um, patterns, all those kinds of things appeal to sight. Sound, whether it's loud or soft, whether the sound is fast or slow, whether it's melodic or jarring, all of these things come into play with sound. Taste, we have the good taste, we have the bad taste, the taste we don't like, we have the salt, sweet, etc. And we have lots of different words to describe all of them. In terms of smell, we have the pleasant and the unpleasant. We have all sorts of opinions about those things. Um, we have the lots of different words to describe those as well. And then we have touch. We have hard and soft. We have prickly. We also have hot and cold, slimy. We have things that are bendable or rigid. Lots of different ways to describe things as well. So we want to work with these vivid verbs, figurative language, sensory language, and we're not just trying for one or the other. And so you want to encourage students to do, I call it like descriptive sentences. So you have the narrative, essay and narrative is a balance between description and narration. So having all your sentences with these complex descriptions is going to be really heavy and it'll affect the development of the plot. So we want that balance. So some of the sentences might seem boring, but then you're making a choice to move the plot forward quickly. And so when you're starting your descriptions in your introduction, I know some students like the introduction has four sentences, five sentences, and three of those sentences are dedicated to all these wonderful descriptions. And then you ask yourself, okay, what's happening in the plot? Who's the character? Where is everything taking place? If the introduction doesn't answer that, then we have a little problem with the descriptions. So the other thing to note, now that we know descriptions need to have all of these things, the other thing to note, which is what I just sort of started explaining, is that descriptions must have a purpose. And I'm saying that slowly, and I shall repeat it. I'm going to put it up on the screen because that is like a really critical part of writing and narratives that I think gets lost on some students because Miss said or Sir said you need a description and you need to add in things here. Um, and then you find students referring to themselves, they referring to themselves like, my skinny feet and, um my wiry fingers. I mean, do people really refer to themselves like that? I don't know people who talk about themselves like that. And so it's it has to be used within a context. And so for description to work well, it needs to be in a context. And having that context done effectively means the difference between that 18 to 20 or liming around 15, 14. Because once the description is there, you're getting marks for having the description. But when you see in the rubric, I'll tell you exactly what it says because I have it here. So in the rubric for narrative writing, it says um, vivid, descriptive, and figurative language establish clarity of narrative elements while sensory details enhance the story. For something to enhance the story, it has to be integrated effectively. And what it means to integrate effectively is to, be worked into the story. So my blue eyes stared at him intently. Yeah, because the blue eyes are staring. We have that integration. Um, you know but if we're doing something unrelated and all of a sudden we mention the blue eyes, why are you telling me your eyes are blue? Do I need to know that to understand who you are and what you're about? Yes, it's a character description, and if that's all you can come up with, keep it because it's better than nothing. But this week what you're practicing with setting is not just randomly dropping in details here and there. Have characters sort of work with observing what's happening around them. Have them notice things about the setting. Have characters interact with this setting. And so the idea is that I know about what's in the environment because when I ran down the stairs, the sound of my feet hitting the wooden steps echoed. So I know the steps are wooden. I'm running down the stairs. Or my footsteps were muffled by the carpet. So I know the place is carpeted. I ran into the living room and tripped over something on the floor. So I know that, okay, somebody left a toy on the floor or something. So, you know, just having description for description's sake is not going to get you into that 18 to 20. You really want to get into that 18 to 20 with setting description, then you want those three: vivid, descriptive, figurative. So we know we need three things, and we want it integrated into the story. So we don't want to just say, like the wind was blowing. Maybe I felt the cool wind on my chocolate skin. So we know that is a, colored person, and we know that the wind is cool, we know that the wind is blowing, all in one phrase. And that's the kind of thing that you want students to practice. It's not going to come naturally all the time. So what you want to do is to sit and discuss that. So this week for the narratives, here's what you're doing. You're revisiting setting for different contexts. And so what you want to do is think about, all right, what are the different locations students will have to write about? Let's see, we can list five immediately. You might have to write about something at the beach. You might write something about a house, your home, visiting a friend or somebody, but you're in a house. You might have a backyard or front yard. You might have classroom or a school, and you might have some sort of forested area. So you identify like five different areas. And then what you want to do is to like brainstorm different expressions that you can use to describe each of the different settings, and have the students sort of come up with ideas and so that they can refine them and create their own phrases that they can use over and over. They could mix and match phrases that they got from books and TV and, different places, and, see how those can be integrated into their stories. And so while you're doing that, think about what different moods you can create in each of these different settings. So for your first session, let's say 30-minute session, because we're working with two 30-minute sessions and an hour for narratives only. And so for the first session, you want to list the different areas, brainstorm some different expressions and so on for different areas. Think about some personifications and similes and metaphors and different ideas that you could come up with to describe those different locations. So that's day one. 30 minutes spent on that. You can go online, look at some expressions, look at different locations and see what the characters can see and experience in those places. Do a short list. So, your next 30-minute session, now we're focusing on mood. What words can you introduce and add in that would focus on the mood? So, we want to have something exciting, something scary, something comforting, something, list like about five that might be popular in the different stories that you can use over and over, and come up with some descriptions that you can use effectively to create the kind of mood that you want to create in the story. And so words that create mood are generally the vivid verbs create mood. So I could skip home versus drag my feet home. We have two different moods there. One feels a little happier while the other one is kind of sad or depressed. So we get mood from the vivid verbs. We also get mood from the how we describe the sky, bright sunny skies, white fluffy clouds, those kinds of things are more happy. Gray clouds, thunderous rain, those kinds of things are more on the somber, melancholic side. So you can use the sky to assist with the mood. You can use the verbs, vivid verbs, to assist with mood. And you can also use the kinds of objects and items in the environment to assist with mood. So let's see. Lush green trees are more likely to feel rich and vibrant and energetic than, brown leaves falling, um, you know, branches without leaves sticking out into the sky, like if they're coming to attack you. Those kinds of, you could use things in the environment. Um, an untidy room versus spick and span clean room, lots of different things like that you can use to show like the mood in the environment. And this is how you bring in setting description and maximize the use of the setting description, because we're giving it for a reason, and that reason is to help us establish mood more than anything else. So um be mindful of how you introduce the setting descriptions, but you're really paying attention to what words are used, and we're looking for vivid, descriptive, and figurative, and then how that is integrated. Why am I telling you this? What's the reason? Yes, I want you to know a little bit about the character, but why? Why do I need to know what the character is wearing? Why do I need to know that they're walking through the forest and the leaves are crunching under them? Why do I need to know that it's so dark they can't see what's in front of them? Why do I need to know these things? So, description on a whole must have a purpose, and setting description helps a lot with mood. So, pay attention to those. And so at the end of your two practice sessions with the descriptions in different locations, and then the sensory descriptions that help with the mood, the next thing that you're doing is giving some prompts. You have three prompts. Have the child choose one, write a complete story, and what you're paying most attention to when you're marking it is you're marking it looking for mood in particular, right? And so and how the vivid descriptions and all those things are used, because now we've covered that. Now we're practicing, we're honing in, we're looking for areas that you could develop, and we're making suggestions on how to develop it. So this is how you would work that, right? And so that's it, I think, for the narrative descriptions. What else do I need you to know with setting descriptions? I did mention that have the character interact with the setting, right? Um, I'm going to put that up on screen because I think that's important. We don't just want to have like the setting is by itself and then the character is over here. You really introduce setting by having the character interact with the setting. That is a key point with setting, whether you're establishing mood or you're helping readers form a mental picture of what the setting looks like. Yeah, you really want to have the character interact with the setting. So yes, you can describe the setting in general, but then how does that impact on the character? So even if you're describing the sky, how does that um help with the character? What does that do to the character? Bright blue sky, sunny things, and then we just launch into the story. Why do we need to know that? Just because it's setting? Well, no, we want the character to be happy about that, because remember, sky and everything is going to be reflecting on mood. So show how it reflects on the mood. So, we describe the sunny sky and the clouds and the puffiness, and I'm looking outside and I'm seeing this and I'm all excited. It's all fitting together. Or I drag myself off my bed and I happen to look out the window and I see that it's gloomy and it's like, yeah, figures. Of course it would be. And then I go about dragging myself through my day. So you're making the mood flow through everything. And these are things students can use, little tips and tricks that they can use to really enhance their story, but they have to practice it and you have to introduce them to it. And so we've already spoken about, so they should know already similes, metaphors, etc. They should know about figurative language and vivid descriptions and vivid verbs and so on. Now they're implementing it and refining their ability to implement it. And so we're not just telling them, hey, you need more setting description. What does that mean? Well, you know what? Have your character interact with this setting, and what would they be doing in this setting that you could use to introduce an element of setting? That's your question. And the child might say, well, I could have him playing with his toys, all right. Then are they scattered around him or are they neatly organized? How can we add some more description to that? So this is how you engage when you do the first two 30-minute sessions, and then you have them right for that third session, sorry, where they're really going to be implementing all that they've practiced and all that they've discussed. So it's an ongoing process. And because we're focusing on it this week doesn't mean that next week we totally ignore it. We are going to be continue working on it, but now you're giving like quick check, a point check to see what's happening with their setting descriptions and how it's working. So, all right, so that closes us off with the setting and narratives. So you have your plan there, you know what to do for reports, you know what to do for the narratives. Now let's shift our attention to um, the comprehension. Now, for those of you who have been following the lives, I haven't traditionally really been getting into a lot of comprehension. I actually only started like midterm last term. And so what you might want to go back and check a few of the previous episodes. Today we're looking at poetry. Last session we looked at, I think, nonfiction. The one before that was fiction. Before that, when we started, I looked at the reason why you need to see them separately. And so that's an episode that would be, if this is episode 36, Then you're looking at 35, 34, and 33 to really get into comprehension. So here's the thing. I'm just going to give like an overview and then we'll get into the poetry. Um, while there are common comprehension questions that will go across the board, the fact is that a nonfiction piece is very different from a fiction piece, which is different from a poem, which is different from a graphic. And because of that, there are some questions that are unique to each. And so you really want to approach them differently. And so my recommendation is to study the past papers. I know practice tests give you lots of practice and so on, but some of the wording and the kinds of questions that come in the practice tests, they're not all um, phrased in the way that the exam wording is phrased. And so you really want to study the practice tests and the past papers, sorry, study the past papers. And so once students have that understanding, when they get to the practice tests, they will do better, but they really do have to study. So if you don't already have a copy of the last 5 exams, and I recommend only up to 5 because prior to that, the format of the exam was different. So you don't want to study the old format. You can use the older passages and so on to practice, but you don't want to study the questions as much, especially the last 4, really. So 2020, 21, 22, and 23, those are the ones you want to study. And you would get like 2 fiction and 2 nonfiction passages. And then you have the 4 poems and the 4 graphics. And you would see how the graphics would come, kinds of questions. There's a pattern. When you study them, you'd see that there's a pattern. And so you know what kinds of questions your child or your students absolutely must know how to answer. And so we're talking poetry today. And with poetry, students absolutely need to know figurative language and sensory language because you will get a question on one or both. And students also need to know mood and tone because you're likely to get a question on that with poetry. Also, with poetry, students need to understand um, sometimes you have characters in poetry. And so you might get a question on the writer or the character in the poem. And so students need to be able to understand that kind of thing as well. Across the board, whether fiction, nonfiction, poem, or graphic, you are going to get a vocabulary question. And most the passage and the poem, you generally also get explain the meaning of a word or a phrase. So you get vocabulary, which is a single word, and then you get explain meaning, where you get a phrase. What does this mean? And so leaning into context clues is important. And so we did a session on context clues. So that would be, I think, what, 6543, episode 33. You can check that one where we went into context clues. And last year I went into context clues again and again because understanding what a context clue is and how to use it to get the answer is not the same thing. Some students, what is a context clue? Oh, yes, miss, I know this. We have that. And they give you exactly details, everything. All right. How do you use it? Well, miss, I read the sentence over and over. That is not how to use a context clue. Context clues, especially with poetry, we have to look at the lines above, the lines below, not just the line that the phrase came in or that the word came in. Also, we have to know how the different types of context clues show up. So, how does an explanation context clue show up? How does a definition context clue show up? How does an antonym context clue or synonym context clue show up? Students need to be able to recognize this, otherwise, they will read it over and over and still not get it. They do have to be able to see how the context clues work. And so in poetry, what you'd find is that quite often you might have to read an entire stanza to get the context of a meaning. Usually it can come before or after, but sometimes you have to read the whole stanza to really get the full context clues because of how the lines are arranged. It's a little bit different from a fiction passage. Um, Also, with poetry, I know there are many rhyming poems, and so students tend to read according to the rhyme, but believe me, you will get a poem that does not quite rhyme. And sometimes I ask myself, um, what are these examiners thinking? Because these poems are quite complex. And so here's a trick with that. You don't have to understand the whole thing in order to answer the questions. That is the beauty of an exam. And it's something that I try to get my students to really understand by teaching them the exam strategies. There's a difference between reading a poem to enjoy it and understand it. There's a difference between that and reading a poem to answer comprehension questions. So here's a tip for all comprehension, but especially for poems and when they don't have rhyme and so on. You're not reading to get it, you're reading to answer questions. So go to the questions first, figure out what it is you're being tested on, and then you can go back and see, find your answers. Because here's what, students don't get marks for understanding the poem, they get marks for the questions. And most people believe that by answering the questions, it shows that they understand the poem. No, it shows that they understand the questions and that they can respond effectively to the questions. So you could answer questions and not understand the whole thing. And that's something that students need to get, because when they read the poem and they don't get it, they start to panic and they think, oh my gosh, I can't answer these questions because I don't know what this poem is telling me. What is going on here? And they get frantic. But here's what, just get them to understand, hey, you don't have to understand the whole thing. You just need to understand this question and be able to find the answer to this question when you go to the poem, and that's it. And so that's the kind of thing that I really want you to get with poems. So I'm looking for, I think this is the 2020, um yeah, this is a 2023. So this is last year's poem. I'm going to share screen so that you could see it for a minute, and then I'm going to wrap up, right? Because we're just about crossing the 1 hour mark. All right, so here we go. Oh, maybe I need to make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. So this poem, the way I describe it is that it's a little bit deceitful because there's a sort of rhyming scheme, something happening in the first stanza, but then it doesn't quite hold up for the rest of the stanzas. And so a student reading this might think, okay, so there's a rhyme and they're going with it, and then they get to the next stanza and they think, okay, what's happening here? And then the third one is like, wait, hold up, what happened to the rhyming? And they get kind of lost because the poem doesn't quite fit what they've been expecting that poems rhyme. Now, in this one, what I would have normally told a student is to read according to punctuation, but there are no full stops here if you notice. So how do we read it? So we go, school is out, happy am I, it's Friday, time to play and unwind. No homework, no note taking, just enjoyment. Racing ideas of what's to be done. Should I read? Should I spend time in the sun? So we have the done and sun kind of rhyming, right? That's the last two lines. But then we get to stanza two. When Friday ends, no sadness comes. The dawn of a newborn Saturday is soon here. Chirping birds, buzzing bees, whistling trees everywhere. All right, so we get here and everywhere. Nice. But then we get a myriad of activities for my eager soul to choose. Patience though, house chores first. Like, wait, what happened to the rhyming of the last two lines? We had a shift. Now we get um chores done. I am as joyful as a flitting hummingbird who has the world to behold. A bicycle ride to the park on my to do list. Race with friends impossible to resist. Loser or winner, still together we remain. Now, resist and list. Okay, right. So we have that rhyme there. Um, and but you notice that it's changing, right? So we go from the last two to 2 and 3, and then we have 3 and 4. So the rhyme is shifting and it's not staying, we understand, okay, the last two and every alternate one, it's different. So we're not reading to rhymes in this poem. We're reading for information and we're looking for figurative language. We're looking for different things. And so when it comes to poetry, get away from the idea that poems have to rhyme and get away from the idea that um, when a poem begins with a certain structure, it continues consistently with that structure, because this is 2023. So this is an actual exam poem. So this is not a practice test that somebody created for practice. This is what came in the exam, and you see the difference. So you see how the rhyming moved and changed. And so students really ought not to focus on rhyming. When it comes to poetry, there's also rhythm, and a rhythm is formed by the highs and lows. So school is out, happy am I. So we get syllables and where the syllables beat, and then we get a rise and a fall. And so we work with rhythm as well as rhyme, not just rhythm, not just rhyme. We work with both, or quite often, sometimes we work with one rhythm only if there's no rhyme, but rhyming is not all there is to it. So when it comes to poetry, we have rhyming, we have rhythm, we have the beat of the poem, we have the voice of the poet, we have the speed at which the information comes out. So there's a lot more to a poem than just the rhyming. So for this week, what you're looking at, again, I'm recommending 2 30-minute sessions and the 1 hour and a bit. I think it's like an hour and a half, roughly a little over an hour, where you do a full practice test. So we're focusing on poetry, but of course you're doing a whole ELA test each time because you want to take a view of everything that's being implemented. And we've already done fiction and nonfiction, so you're looking at both the passage and the poem when you do the practice test this week, right? But make sure students understand. So your first 30-minute session, we're looking at the fact that some poems don't rhyme. And so therefore you look at the rhythm and other elements of poetry to get meaning and to feel the flow. It's almost like a spoken word kind of thing where you focus on the rhythm and not the rhyme as much. So that's the kind of flair you're going for. And so you could even listen to a few spoken word pieces and have the students discuss the mood and how the poet delivers their the poem and so on. And then the second one, you want to look at how the questions relate to that and where to find answers for questions. So we're looking at keywords, we're looking at context clues, we're looking at generalizations and summarizing thoughts and ideas. That's what we're doing in the next 30-minute session. And then, well, the third one, you're implementing this with a practice test and working on the delivery of the comprehension. So I think so when it comes to poetry, not everything rhymes. Some poems feel a little bit crazy because the rhyming scheme changes from stanza to stanza. So then forget the rhyme, work with the rhythm, and work with the information and punctuation. And that's going to help students really approach it a lot better. And of course, you're studying the questions and how they come. And then, so that's what I work with my students. We study the questions and I show them how the questions are phrased and what it means by certain phrasing and where to find the answers, how to form the answers based on how the questions are phrased. Um, and that's the extra studies that we go through, and we practice that, and we do that for all the different types as well. So I think that's it for today. So I think you have quite a lot to work with. So you know what you're doing for reports, you know what you're doing for narratives, you know what you're doing for the comprehension. You're focusing on poetry this week, even though you're testing all of it, and you're going into those kinds of details. So now you have a plan, you know what to do, you're structured, you're getting the feedback that you need to determine how your student is performing and the question areas that they're covering. So, of course, feel free to send me questions. I may not be able to respond directly to all of them, but I will make note of them and answer them in a live if I can't answer you directly immediately. But I will cover the answers that you need to help you make the most out of this, exam strategy run heading up to SEA 2024. So thank you so much for your time. For those of you who were able to stick in for the whole live, those who asked questions, made comments, I appreciate you. And somebody said they knew me from USC. So hi, thank you. I'm taking that as a huge compliment. You know what? Let me read it out and tell everybody what you said. So, the person said, Miss Shelley Ann, it's such a great pleasure to be here with you today. I know you personally from USC, best English teacher I know. Thank you very much. That made my day. Thank you so much for saying that. I really do appreciate you for saying that. Sometimes when I'm talking to the screen, it's just me here, right? And so I feel like I'm talking to myself and I wonder, okay, am I making any sense? Are people really getting it? So I really, really sincerely appreciate that. Thank you so much. So, guys, that's it. I'm going for to this Tuesday. We're finished. So next week, join us again. We're continuing with graphics for poetry, for the comprehension and some other things. And so you'll get what you need, and it's a work in progress, and you will do absolutely wonderful helping your child or students, and they will do well as well. So take care, and I shall see you next week. Bye, everybody.